The war was never supposed to reach places like this, and that belief was what made the moment so shocking that it echoed across the galaxy long after the screams ended. The human hospital ship drifted slowly through neutral space, moving at a careful pace, its massive white hull glowing softly against the dark stars. Large medical symbols were painted clearly on every side, impossible to miss even from extreme distance. The ship did not hide. It did not run dark. It did not pretend to be anything other than what it was. A place of mercy. Inside its vast corridors were wounded soldiers from many species, not just humans. There were alien civilians rescued from shattered worlds, children pulled from the rubble of bombed cities, doctors and nurses who had worked without rest for weeks. The ship carried no heavy weapons. Its shields were minimal, designed only to protect against debris and accidents, not war. There were no escort fleets nearby because none were supposed to be needed. Neutral space was meant to be safe. Mercy was meant to be respected. Inside the medical bays, life went on quietly. A human nurse adjusted a monitor beside an injured alien pilot, speaking gently as if the war had never existed. A doctor stitched wounds under soft lights while a child slept nearby, clutching a small toy given to her during evacuation. The air smelled of antiseptic and recycled oxygen. Pain existed here, but so did hope. This ship was proof that even in war, some lines were not crossed. Or so everyone believed. On the bridge, the crew monitored navigation calmly, sharing quiet updates, planning the next humanitarian stop. No one felt fear. No one expected danger. The ship's presence was announced openly on all channels, its identity confirmed and broadcast as protocol required. This was not a trick. This was trust. Then space changed. Without warning, sensors screamed as multiple warp signatures tore open the void nearby. An alien war fleet emerged in aggressive formation, weapons already charged. There was no warning hail. No demand. No mistake in identification. The hospital ship's medical symbols were still glowing brightly when the first missile struck. The impact tore through the outer hull and ripped directly into a medical bay. Metal screamed. Gravity lurched. Beds slammed into walls. The lights went out in half the ship as emergency systems failed. Another strike followed, then another, each one precise, deliberate, aimed not at engines, but at places where the wounded lay. Patients screamed as oxygen vanished. Doctors were thrown across rooms. A nurse was killed instantly while trying to shield a child with her own body. Fire spread through corridors that had held nothing but quiet moments seconds earlier. On the bridge, chaos exploded. Power failed across multiple systems. Navigation collapsed. Communications shattered into static. The captain shouted orders that barely carried over the alarms. "We are a hospital ship," the communications officer screamed into open channels, broadcasting on every frequency, repeating the message again and again. "Cease fire. We are unarmed. We are medical." The response was more missiles. The alien fleet did not hesitate. They did not slow. They did not even acknowledge the broadcasts. This was not an accident. This was a choice. Inside the medical decks, doctors and nurses did not run. They moved toward the wounded even as explosions shook the ship apart. One human doctor crawled through smoke to reach an alien child trapped under debris, pushing her oxygen mask onto the child's face before the hull ruptured and pulled him into vacuum. Another medic held two patients steady while fire burned through the ceiling above them, refusing to leave even when ordered. These were not soldiers. These were healers. They died doing what they had sworn to do. The screams were recorded. The images were recorded. Emergency beacons activated automatically, sending fragmented footage and audio into galactic networks before systems failed completely. The galaxy watched in horror as a ship of mercy was torn apart in real time. The attack lasted minutes. That was all it took. By the time the alien fleet pulled back, the hospital ship was crippled, drifting, bleeding atmosphere and power into space. Entire sections were gone. Hundreds were dead. Survivors floated in dark corridors, injured and terrified, clinging to whatever structure remained. The enemy fleet did not finish the ship off. They did not need to. The message had already been sent. Mercy meant nothing to them. Neutrality meant nothing. When the last missile detonated and the attackers warped away, silence fell, broken only by distant alarms and the faint cries of the living. Across the galaxy, the recordings spread faster than any official report. Civilians saw doctors die on screen. Leaders watched children scream as pressure dropped. Military commanders froze as the reality settled in. A hospital ship had been attacked on purpose. There was no justification, no misunderstanding, no strategic excuse. This was a crime so clear that even rival species agreed on one thing. A line had been crossed. Many expected humanity to respond immediately, to unleash fleets in rage, to burn worlds in retaliation. They waited for the usual human reaction they thought they understood. It never came. Human space went quiet. There were no speeches, no threats, no emergency broadcasts filled with anger. Fleets did not surge forward. Weapons did not fire. Human channels fell into controlled silence so complete it made allies uneasy and enemies nervous. On Earth, governments closed doors. Military commands locked down communications. The galaxy leaned forward, waiting. That silence was not confusion. It was restraint. And restraint, when coming from a species known for brutal survival and overwhelming force, was terrifying. Deep beneath Earth's surface, in a facility that officially did not exist, ancient protocols activated. Seals that had not moved in decades unlocked one by one. Inside a reinforced chamber sat a man erased from history, his name removed from records, his work classified beyond legend. He was not imprisoned out of fear of rebellion. He was contained out of fear of success. He had ended wars before by thinking in ways no one else could, by solving conflicts so completely that there was nothing left to fight. Humanity had buried him because the galaxy was not ready for his mind. Now the galaxy had made itself ready. A single screen lit up in the chamber, playing the hospital ship footage once, then stopping. The man watched without expression, his eyes tracking every detail, every choice made by the attackers. He said nothing for a long time. The officials in the room did not rush him. They knew better. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm, almost tired. They didn't attack soldiers, he said. They attacked mercy. He looked up slowly. That changes everything. Outside, Earth remained silent. Across the stars, the galaxy waited. It did not yet understand that the war had already ended, not with fleets or fire, but with the awakening of a mind built for endings, a genius who did not fight battles, but erased the need for them. Humanity's silence did not feel empty. It felt deliberate, heavy, and controlled, the kind of silence that made even enemies stop breathing for a moment and wonder what they had just triggered. Across human space, fleets remained in place. No emergency mobilization alerts blared. No war declarations were broadcast. To the galaxy, this restraint felt unnatural. Humans were known for fast, overwhelming responses when lines were crossed. This line had not just been crossed, it had been erased. And yet, nothing happened. That was when fear truly began. Inside Earth's deepest command levels, doors sealed and conversations dropped to whispers. The footage of the hospital ship played again and again on secured screens. Doctors dying while shielding patients. Children screaming as pressure dropped. Nurses holding hands with the wounded until the end. Every frame was examined, not for rage, but for understanding. Humanity was not asking how to punish. Humanity was asking how to end this kind of act forever. In the sealed chamber beneath layers of reinforced stone and forgotten infrastructure, the man known only by erased designations sat perfectly still. He was not young, but his eyes were sharp, alive, focused in a way that made people uneasy. This was the mind humanity had hidden from the galaxy and, in some ways, from itself. A strategist whose solutions did not escalate wars, but collapsed them. He had once rewritten entire conflict zones without firing a shot, had dismantled empires by turning their own systems against their ability to function. Too many leaders had looked at his results and felt fear, not of failure, but of how final his success always was. So humanity had locked him away when peace seemed possible. Now peace had been stabbed through a hospital bed. The officials around him waited as he finally spoke again, slowly, choosing every word with care. They wanted terror, he said. If we answer with rage, we give it to them. He leaned forward slightly. We will answer with inevitability. His plan did not begin with fleets. That confused everyone at first. He asked for maps, not of borders, but of logistics. Supply routes, medical corridors, trade dependencies, communication relays, cultural pressure points. He studied how the attacking empire fed its fleets, how its officers advanced careers, how its allies justified support. He ignored weapon counts entirely. Weapons are loud, he said. Systems are quiet. Quiet things break worlds. As he spoke, teams across Earth began adjusting things so small they barely registered. Trade agreements were delayed. Maintenance schedules shifted. Navigation data updates arrived slightly corrupted in ways that looked like clerical error. Nothing illegal. Nothing aggressive. Nothing that could justify retaliation. The galaxy saw only routine friction. The Empire saw nothing at all. Weeks passed. The attacking Empire celebrated publicly, boasting about strength, claiming the hospital ship had been a disguised military asset. Some species believed them. Some did not. What mattered was that doubt spread. Human diplomats said little, releasing only the raw footage of the attack without commentary. No accusations. No speeches. Just evidence. Let the galaxy look. Let it decide. Meanwhile, the genius continued working in silence. He adjusted time itself as a weapon. Fleets began arriving late to exercises. Supplies missed rendezvous points by hours, then days. Orders conflicted. Promotions stalled. Officers argued. None of it was catastrophic. That was the point. The Empire began bleeding efficiency, confidence, and trust without knowing why. Commanders blamed subordinates. Subordinates blamed systems. Systems failed again. Inside the Empire, fear crept in sideways. Not from human attacks, but from uncertainty. Why hadn't humanity responded? Why were human fleets not moving? Why was everything suddenly harder? Their intelligence divisions reported nothing concrete. No fleet concentrations. No weapons tests. Nothing. That absence gnawed at them. Empires knew how to fight enemies. They did not know how to fight patience. The genius watched reports quietly, confirming predictions. They will turn inward, he said. They always do. And they did. Investigations turned into purges. Trust eroded. Allies grew nervous. Trade partners quietly distanced themselves, not wanting to be near a power that had openly attacked a hospital ship. The galaxy had long memories for some things. Mercy was one of them. Behind closed doors, even humanity's allies began asking questions. Why no retaliation? Why no response? Human representatives answered calmly. We are responding, they said. Just not loudly. That answer unsettled everyone who heard it. Because it suggested something far worse than war was already underway. The genius finally approved the next phase. Not an attack. A revelation. The hospital ship footage was officially entered into galactic lore archives as an uncontested war crime. Names were attached. Faces identified. Command signatures verified. No commentary followed. The galaxy reacted on its own. Neutral systems closed ports to the Empire. Insurance networks cancelled coverage. Trade convoys rerouted. Not because humanity demanded it, but because no one wanted to be associated with those who murdered the wounded. Inside the sealed chamber, the genius watched the data streams converge exactly as expected. He did not smile. There was no satisfaction in this work. Only necessity. They wanted to show the galaxy they were strong, he said quietly. Instead, they showed everyone they are unsafe. He approved one final adjustment, the most subtle of all. Human hospital ships resumed operations. But now with shared escort protocols from multiple species, voluntary and automatic. The galaxy itself moved to protect Mercy. That was the moment the genius leaned back and closed his eyes briefly. The fate of the galaxy had already shifted. Not because humanity struck back, but because humanity had forced everyone to choose a side. And when the choice was between power and mercy, most of the galaxy, at last, chose mercy. Far away, inside the attacking Empire's command chambers, alarms finally began to sound, not of incoming fleets, but of collapsing influence. Allies withdrew. Supply chains fractured. Officers resigned or defected. Confusion became fear. Fear became desperation. They demanded to know when humanity would fight. They never realized the truth until it was too late. Humanity had already answered. And the answer was not destruction. It was inevitability. The first sign that something was truly wrong did not come from battle reports or fleet losses, it came from hesitation, the kind that creeps into command rooms when certainty begins to rot from the inside. Inside the alien empire's high command, admirals stared at tactical displays that showed no direct human threat and yet felt more exposed than ever before. Nothing made sense. Human fleets had not advanced. No borders were challenged. No counterstrikes launched. And still, everything was getting worse. Supplies arrived late. Reinforcements reached staging areas out of order. Entire task forces waited for commands that contradicted one another. Officers argued over priorities that had once been clear. The Empire had crushed worlds before. It knew what retaliation looked like. This was not it. This felt like being watched while slowly sinking. At the edges of the Empire, captains began reporting strange patterns. Navigation data updated too frequently, forcing recalculations that delayed jumps by hours. Docking permissions were suddenly denied by neutral stations that had always cooperated before. Insurance protections vanished overnight, leaving fleets grounded because no one wanted to risk ships without coverage. None of these things were attacks. None of them justified war responses. And yet together, they strangled momentum. Crews grew restless. Morale dipped. Whispers spread through lower ranks. Had the humans done something? Or had the galaxy simply turned its back? Commanders demanded answers from intelligence divisions, but intelligence had nothing concrete to offer. There were no intercepted orders. No suspicious fleet movements. Just friction. Everywhere. The genius watched this unfold with cold patience. He understood something the Empire did not. Power collapses fastest when it begins doubting itself. He did not push too hard. He let the pressure build naturally, letting the enemy blame its own people. Inside the sealed chamber, screens displayed cascading probabilities, each one tightening like a net. They will look for someone to punish, he said quietly. When they do, they will fracture. He was right. Investigations inside the Empire turned ugly. Officers accused one another of incompetence. Administrators were arrested. Loyal crews were reassigned suddenly, breaking bonds of trust that held units together. The Empire began to eat itself from the inside, all while humanity never fired a shot. Across the galaxy, reactions deepened. The hospital ship footage was now everywhere, replayed in council chambers, public feeds, and private conversations. Species that had once tolerated the Empire's aggression found themselves uncomfortable defending the undefendable. Children watched doctors die on screens and asked questions leaders could not answer. Why did they attack people who were helping? No political explanation softened that truth. Human diplomats remained quiet, present but restrained, letting the evidence speak for itself. That silence was devastating. It left no room for excuses. Mercy had been attacked. The galaxy could not look away anymore. Inside the Empire, desperation began to replace arrogance. Leaders demanded decisive action. If humans won't fight, we will force them, some argued. Orders were drafted for aggressive maneuvers near human space. The moment those orders leaked, allies panicked. Trade partners withdrew support instantly. Neutral worlds closed borders preemptively. Even long-standing client states hesitated. No one wanted to be pulled into a conflict where humanity had chosen patience instead of rage. That patience felt like a trap everyone could sense but no one could see. The Empire delayed its own plans, trapped by the fear that acting would only tighten the invisible grip already closing around it. Meanwhile, the survivors of the hospital ship were finally brought to safety. Human rescue vessels arrived days after the attack, careful, methodical, gentle. Survivors were treated, comforted, and given space to grieve. No cameras were allowed. No speeches made. Humanity protected the victims first, not the narrative. That choice resonated deeply. Doctors from other species volunteered for joint medical programs. Hospital ships across the galaxy adopted new shared escort standards, not mandated by force, but agreed upon by conscience. The genius noted this quietly. The galaxy was changing direction on its own. That was always the goal. Inside his chamber, the genius reviewed one final set of data and felt something rare settle into his chest. Certainty. The Empire was finished, even if it did not know it yet. Not destroyed. Finished. Its future had already narrowed to collapse or surrender. He authorized the next phase, the one that would make the truth undeniable. Not a strike. A mirror. Every system affected by the Empire's campaigns received full access to the hospital ship recordings, authenticated, timestamped, and legally sealed. No editing. No commentary. Just reality. The effect was immediate. Protests erupted. Political pressure exploded. Leaders distanced themselves publicly. The Empire's image shattered beyond repair. In the Empire's capital, a senior commander stood alone before a massive viewport, staring at ships docked but unmoving, crews uncertain, future unclear. He finally understood what they had done wrong. They had attacked mercy thinking it was weakness. They had expected rage and received silence. And that silence had turned the entire galaxy against them without a single shot fired. He whispered a truth no one wanted to hear. "We didn't start a war with humanity," he said. "We ended our place in the galaxy." Far away, deep beneath Earth, the genius shut down several screens and stood up slowly. His work was not finished yet, but the hardest part was done. The enemy was already falling. They just had not hit the ground yet. The breaking point did not arrive with an explosion or a fleet movement, it arrived with isolation, the slow and terrifying realization that the galaxy had begun to look away. Inside the alien empire's capital, emergency sessions ran without pause, but every new report made the room feel smaller, heavier, more desperate. Trade partners were suspending agreements temporarily. Neutral systems were denying docking access for safety reasons. Banking networks froze credit lines without explanation. None of it was officially coordinated, yet it happened everywhere at once, like a shared instinct spreading faster than law. The Empire's leaders shouted about conspiracies and human manipulation, but deep down they understood the truth they could not say out loud. This was not humanity attacking them. This was the galaxy deciding it did not want to stand beside those who fired on a hospital ship. Across countless worlds, people watched the footage again and again. Doctors shielding patients. Nurses dying with hands still on life support controls. Children screaming as the lights went out. The images burned themselves into memory in a way no propaganda could erase. Species that had once ignored distant wars now felt something personal, something raw. This was not politics. This was not strategy. This was wrong. Councils convened not to debate blame, but to distance themselves. Public statements were released condemning the attack, some carefully worded, others furious and direct. Even worlds that feared humanity more than the Empire found themselves unable to defend the indefensible. Mercy had been attacked, and Mercy had many friends. Inside the Empire's fleets, morale collapsed. Crews whispered to one another about being cursed, about being marked. Some officers refused orders, claiming systems errors or crew instability. Others resigned outright. Veteran soldiers who had fought for years suddenly questioned why they were wearing their uniforms at all. The idea that they had become enemies of mercy itself shook them in ways no battlefield loss ever had. Commanders tried to reassert discipline, but discipline built on fear crumbles when belief is gone. Ships sat idle in docks, fully armed and utterly useless, because no one knew who would support them if they launched again. The genius watched these developments in silence, his expression unchanged, but his focus absolute. He had predicted this phase precisely. Once the galaxy chooses, he said quietly to the officials nearby, power becomes irrelevant. He authorized the next step, not as an escalation, but as confirmation. Humanity released a single, carefully timed statement. It contained no threats, no demands, no calls for war. It simply acknowledged the victims of the hospital ship attack by name, species, and role. Doctors, nurses, children, healers. Nothing else. No mention of the attackers at all. The effect was devastating. By refusing to even name the Empire, humanity stripped it of relevance. The galaxy mourned the victims together, and in that shared mourning, the attackers were quietly erased from moral legitimacy. Meanwhile, human fleets remained exactly where they were, not advancing, not retreating, holding a posture that spoke of restraint rather than fear. This confused the Empire's remaining allies more than anything else. If humanity was not preparing to conquer, then what was it doing? The answer became clear as new galactic resolutions passed with overwhelming support. Hospital ships were declared sacred under shared law. Attacking one would trigger automatic sanctions across trade, travel, and communication, enforced collectively. No human enforcement clause was needed. Everyone voted yes. No one wanted to be on the wrong side of that rule. The genius allowed himself the smallest exhale. The galaxy had just written humanity's values into its own laws. In the Empire's capital, panic finally turned into despair. Their ambassadors returned home one by one, dismissed politely but firmly from foreign courts. Borders closed. Supply convoys were turned away. Even internal systems began rationing as resources tightened. The Empire had not lost a war. It had lost trust. And trust, once gone, does not return with weapons. A senior leader finally ordered a fleet mobilization toward human space, desperate to force a reaction, any reaction. The order never fully executed. Half the fleet reported logistical failures. The other half refused to cross into neutral corridors now protected by shared accords. The Empire found itself trapped by the very galaxy it had once dominated. Far away, survivors of the hospital ship gathered in a quiet memorial aboard a human medical station. Humans and aliens stood side by side, lighting small beacons for the dead. No cameras recorded it. No broadcasts were made. The genius insisted on that. "This is not a performance," he said. "This is why we are doing this." Doctors from many species pledged cooperation. Medical ships shared resources. Old rivalries softened in the presence of shared grief. Mercy, once attacked, had become a unifying force. That outcome mattered more than any surrender. As the Empire's influence collapsed, smaller worlds began making decisions that would have seemed impossible months earlier. They reopened borders to refugees. They answered distress calls they once ignored. They reinforced hospital escorts voluntarily. Fear of humanity faded, replaced by something far more complex. Respect. The realization spread that humanity's strength was not in how hard it could strike, but in how carefully it chose when not to. The genius understood this was the true endgame. Not punishment, but precedent. In the sealed chamber, he reviewed the final projections. The Empire's future paths narrowed to two: total internal collapse or formal capitulation under galactic law. Either way, the fate of the galaxy had already shifted. He turned to the officials and spoke softly, with a trace of weariness. They thought attacking Mercy would show strength, he said. Instead, it taught everyone else what must never be tolerated. Outside, the stars burned quietly. No fleets clashed. No worlds burned. And yet, the balance of the galaxy had been rewritten, not by fire, but by the moment everyone decided, together, that some lines are never crossed, and those who cross them will stand alone in the dark. By the time the alien empire understood the full depth of what had happened, it was already too late to reverse, too late to threaten, too late to pretend strength. Their war rooms were still full of officers, their fleet still existed on paper, their weapons still worked, but none of it mattered anymore because power without permission is just noise, and the galaxy had stopped listening. Inside the Empire's highest command chamber, leaders argued not about how to win, but about how to be noticed again. Their greatest fear was no longer defeat. It was irrelevance. Humanity had denied them the one thing empires crave when challenged, a dramatic enemy. There was no great human fleet bearing down on their borders. No declaration of vengeance. No heroic last stand to rally around. There was only silence, law, and consequence. That silence crushed morale far more effectively than bombardment ever could. Desperation crept into every decision. The Empire's leaders ordered a full military mobilization, hoping the sight of moving fleets would force humanity to react, to finally reveal its anger. Shipyards lit up. Engines powered on. Banners were raised. But as ships prepared to depart, something broke again. Crews did not report in full numbers. Dock workers slowed operations. Suppliers delayed fuel deliveries. Insurance networks refused coverage for outbound warships. Even internal logistics systems flagged movements as high-risk activities. The Empire realized with growing horror that it no longer controlled its own momentum. Fear had infected every layer of its structure. No one wanted to be the officer whose ship crossed the invisible line and triggered consequences no one could predict. Across the galaxy, reactions hardened into habit. Ports denied entry automatically. Trade contracts dissolved quietly. Banking systems refused transactions without explanation. This was not coordinated by humanity. It did not need to be. The genius had understood something fundamental about intelligent civilizations. When enough people agree on what is unacceptable, enforcement becomes automatic. The attack on the hospital ship had crossed a moral threshold that could not be walked back with words. Mercy had been targeted, and the galaxy had decided that was unforgivable. The Empire's pleas for dialogue were received politely and then ignored. Not rejected. Ignored. And being ignored was worse than being hated. Humanity remained steady, almost gentle, in its public posture. Hospital ships continued operating, now with shared escort systems from multiple species. Medical crews moved freely across borders once closed by suspicion. Survivors of the destroyed ship were given time, space, and care. Some never returned to service. Some did. Humanity did not rush them. The genius insisted on that too. "We don't heal trauma with schedules," he said. Memorials were held quietly on human worlds, not grand monuments, but simple gatherings where names were spoken aloud and remembered. The galaxy watched this as well. Humanity mourned publicly, honestly, without turning grief into spectacle. That restraint deepened the contrast with the Empire's bluster and desperation. Inside the sealed chamber, the genius studied the final stage of collapse forming exactly as predicted. The Empire's allies were gone. Its reputation was shattered. Its economy was tightening. Internal dissent grew louder. All of this without a single human weapon firing in anger. He authorized one final move, not to punish, but to close the loop. Humanity proposed a binding galactic convention protecting medical vessels, evacuation corridors, and neutral rescue operations. The terms were strict. Violations would trigger automatic sanctions and shared enforcement. There was no clause granting humanity special authority. That was intentional. The vote passed with near-unanimous support. Even species that feared human influence supported it, because the rule protected everyone. The Empire signed last, quietly, without ceremony, because refusing would have isolated them completely. In that moment, they surrendered something far more important than territory. They surrendered the future shape of war. Within the Empire's leadership, something finally broke. A senior commander stood before his peers and spoke a truth no one else would say. "We wanted them to bleed," he said. "Instead, they taught the galaxy to close its doors to us." There was no response. No argument. Only silence and the shared understanding that they had attacked the one thing that united their enemies instead of dividing them. Humanity had turned their crime into a permanent rule of the universe. There would be no redemption through battle. No reset through victory. This stain would follow them for generations. Far away, aboard a rebuilt human hospital ship, a nurse stood at a viewport watching stars drift past. She had survived the attack. The scars on her hands were still visible. A young alien patient sat beside her, asking quietly if the war was over. She thought for a moment before answering. "This part is," she said softly. That simple moment mattered more than any treaty. It meant mercy had survived the attempt to destroy it. The genius received a report about the exchange and nodded once. This was why the silence had been necessary. This was why rage had been denied. The goal was never revenge. It was transformation. As the Empire's fleet slowly powered down, unsure of what future they even served anymore, the galaxy adjusted to a new reality. Attacking mercy was no longer a risk calculation. It was a dead end. Humanity had ensured that truth without burning a single world. In doing so, it changed how wars would be fought forever. And deep beneath Earth, the deadly genius prepared to step back into obscurity once more. Knowing his work was almost complete. The galaxy would remember this lesson long after his name was forgotten. The galaxy did not change all at once, it shifted slowly, like gravity taking hold after a long fall, and humanity felt that shift more deeply than anyone else because it had been born from restraint instead of force. In the weeks following the Empire's quiet capitulation, human space remained calm, almost solemn, as if everyone understood that something larger than victory had occurred. Fleets stood down in perfect order. War rooms dimmed their lights. Admirals who had prepared themselves for brutal retaliation found themselves standing in silence, realizing they would never give the orders they had trained their whole lives to deliver. This was not frustration. It was relief. Humanity had proven something to itself that no simulation or doctrine ever could. It could end a war without becoming what it hated. Across human worlds, the story of the hospital ship settled into public consciousness, not as propaganda, but as memory. Names of the dead were read quietly in schools, medical academies, and fleet halls. Children learned not about enemy ships or tactics, but about doctors who stayed when they could have run, nurses who shielded beds with their own bodies, medics who chose duty even when the hull was tearing open. These stories did not make humanity angry. They made humanity careful. Careful with power. Careful with silence. Careful with what kind of species it wanted to be remembered as. The genius had insisted on this tone from the beginning. If we teach them to fear us, he had said, we will have to keep terrifying them forever. If we teach them to respect mercy, they will guard it themselves. The survivors of the hospital ship became the quiet heart of everything that followed. They were not paraded in front of cameras. They were not asked to speak unless they chose to. Humanity gave them space, time, and choice. Some returned to service, stepping back into medical bays with hands that trembled at first, then steadied. Others walked away, carrying scars that would never fully fade. Both choices were honored equally. When a rebuilt hospital ship launched under a new name, there was no cheering crowd. Only a small gathering of crew, human and alien, standing together as the engines powered up. The ship's hull was still white. The medical symbols still glowed. Mercy would not hide just because it had been attacked. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the consequences deepened. The empire that had fired on the hospital ship did not collapse overnight, but it never recovered its former confidence. Its fleets remained largely docked, its commanders cautious to the point of paralysis. Neighboring powers no longer deferred to it. Smaller systems that had once feared its shadow found the courage to speak, to demand accountability, to renegotiate relationships that had always favored the strong. The Empire had learned the cost of attacking mercy was not destruction, but exposure. Everyone had seen what it was willing to do. And no amount of military strength could erase that truth. The genius watched all of this from his sealed chamber, reviewing reports with the same calm precision he had shown from the start. He did not seek praise. He rejected formal recognition. When asked if he believed the lesson would last, he answered honestly. Nothing lasts forever, he said. But this will last longer than fear. That was enough. His work was not about permanence. It was about direction. He authorized the final stage of withdrawal, slowly dismantling the systems he had put in place, letting the galaxy carry the lesson forward on its own. Power, once used, should step back. Otherwise, it becomes control. On Earth, the chamber doors prepared to seal again. Officials stood nearby, uncertain, almost reluctant. One of them finally asked the question no one else dared to voice. What if they forget? The genius paused, considering it carefully. They might, he said. That's why we must never. The doors closed without ceremony, the man once again erased from public existence, his influence already woven into the structure of galactic law and custom. Humanity did not need him visible anymore. The lesson had taken root. Years passed. Trade flourished along safer routes. Hospital ships moved freely with shared escorts. Neutral space felt truly neutral for the first time in centuries. Children of multiple species grew up learning the same story, not as myth, but as caution. Attack soldiers and you may start a war. Attack mercy and you will stand alone. Humanity's reputation shifted from unpredictable to principled. Not weak. Not gentle. Principled. And in a galaxy filled with ambition and fear, that distinction mattered more than raw power. On the anniversary of the hospital ship's destruction, a quiet memorial was held aboard the rebuilt vessel. A human doctor stood beside an alien nurse, both survivors, both changed. They did not speak about the Empire. They spoke about the patients they had saved afterward. About the lives that continued. About why they would keep doing this work despite everything. In that moment, the galaxy's fate felt less abstract. It felt human. The genius received a final report confirming the memorial had concluded peacefully. He allowed himself a rare smile, small and fleeting. The war that had begun with an attack on mercy had ended with mercy becoming untouchable. And that was humanity's true victory. Not that it could destroy its enemies, but that it could force the galaxy to protect what should never have been attacked in the first place. The stars did not burn. Fleets did not clash. Yet the future had been rewritten all the same, by silence, by patience, and by the decision to let mercy be stronger than wrath. The galaxy did not remember the end of this war as a battle, it remembered it as a pause, a long and heavy pause where everyone realized that something irreversible had happened, not because of destruction, but because of restraint. Years passed, borders shifted, governments changed, and new conflicts rose and fell, yet one rule never weakened. Hospital ships were never touched again. Not by pirates. Not by empires. Not by desperate factions with nothing left to lose. Even the most ruthless warlords rerouted their fleets rather than risk being associated with that single unforgivable act. The memory of the white hull breaking apart in neutral space lived on, and so did the memory of humanity's response. Silence first. Consequence later. No one wanted to find out what came after patience a second time. Humanity's place in the galaxy settled into something quieter and far more powerful than dominance. Humans were not feared as conquerors. They were respected as guardians of a line no one dared cross. When disputes arose near medical corridors, human envoys were invited not to threaten, but to witness. Their presence alone calmed situations. Everyone understood that humans did not rush to anger, but when mercy was violated, they did not forget. That reputation reshaped diplomacy in ways no fleet ever could. The galaxy learned that some values, once defended properly, become self-enforcing. The rebuilt hospital ship continued its missions, traveling farther than its predecessor ever had. Its crew included humans and aliens who had once stood on opposite sides of war. Some bore scars. Some carried grief that never fully faded. Yet they worked together in quiet understanding, treating the wounded, evacuating civilians, delivering hope when none should have survived. Children aboard that ship grew up hearing the story of why the hull was painted white, why the symbols glowed so brightly, why escorts never strayed far. They did not hear it as a story of hatred. They heard it as a promise. That if they chose to help, even when it was dangerous, the universe might answer in ways they could not imagine. Deep beneath Earth, the sealed chamber remained untouched. The genius slept, not in chains, but in trust. Humanity did not erase his existence out of fear anymore. It honored it by not needing him again. His legacy lived not in weapons or plans, but in the behavior of an entire galaxy that now understood the cost of attacking mercy. Occasionally, officials reviewed contingency files bearing his mark, not to activate them, but to remind themselves why restraint mattered. Every time they did, the conclusion was the same. This was not a weapon to use often. This was a line drawn once, meant to last. The alien empire that had started it all survived, but it was never the same. Its expansion dreams died quietly. Its leaders aged under the weight of shame rather than defeat. New generations were taught carefully rewritten histories, but the truth always leaked through. Somewhere, every young officer eventually learned why their fleets no longer fired on certain targets. They learned what happened when mercy was treated as weakness. And most of them, silently, were grateful they would never be asked to repeat that mistake. On the anniversary of the attack, there were no grand ceremonies across the galaxy. No universal moment of silence. Instead, there were thousands of small ones. A nurse pausing before entering a ward. A captain rerouting a patrol away from a medical convoy. A commander choosing restraint over convenience. These moments mattered more than monuments. They proved the lesson had taken root where it mattered most. In daily choices. One evening, aboard the hospital ship, a young human medic asked an older doctor why humanity had not simply destroyed the attackers when it had the chance. The doctor considered the question carefully before answering. Because if we had, he said softly, they would have learned to fear us. Instead, The galaxy learned to protect mercy. The medic nodded, understanding settling slowly but deeply. That answer carried more weight than any victory speech. Far beyond charted space, new civilizations rose, unaware at first of the rules that governed this galaxy. But they learned quickly. Every map they received marked medical corridors clearly. Every briefing included the same warning. Hospital ships are sacred. Attack them, and the galaxy will turn its back on you. Humanity did not need to enforce that rule anymore. Everyone else did it for them. That was the final proof the genius had been right all along. And so the story ended not with fire, but with memory. A memory of doctors who did not run. Of nurses who chose others over themselves. Of a species that answered atrocity not with rage, but with a plan so patient and precise that it reshaped the future. The galaxy moved on, changed forever, carrying a quiet truth written into its stars. Attack soldiers, and you may start a war. Attack mercy, and you will lose your place in the universe.